Hey guys, so welcome back, travelers. If you joined us last week, you know that we had an amazing, chilling conversation with Kim, the host of Slaycation. And we dove into some of the most fascinating, crazy true crime, I should say. Let me not get tongue twisted here. But there were some pretty crazy stories. And it got us to asking the bigger question: how does Kim handle the emotional weight of the levity of these true crime stories? Like, because a lot of bad shit happens, and that's hard to cover such dark topics, you know, on the daily. You see what I'm saying?
Right. And so today we're actually picking up where we left off with Kim, and she is back to share how she processes that heavy side of true crime
Yeah.
storytelling. So if you've ever wondered how someone who's reporting on this, who's telling these stories, handles that, Kim's going to answer that question for us in today's episode. We're also going to dive into a few more of the stories that she's covered. So make sure you grab your passport and maybe a flashlight, and let's jump right into part two with Kim from Slaycation. And a lot of these episodes bring up a lot of emotions: the anger, the sadness, the frustration, the what would I do? Like, what if that were me? How would I handle that? What if that were
Right.
my family member? How do you balance that emotion for yourself, like as you're doing this and keeping from getting overwhelmed or bogged down by those emotions?
Well, I think a lot of it is just sort of, again, kind of keeping in the back of my head, like, what is the message in this
Mm-hmm.
episode? What is the overall message? You know, I think, like, even the McGreevy case, the message is there before the grace of God go I. We never know until we are there.
Right.
There's not one parent that has been worn down by their kid to a stub and just gave in.
Yes.
We've
Sure.
all been there.
Yep, sure have.
And if you say that you haven't and that you would never, good for you. But
That's because they haven't been tested yet. Never
exactly,
say never, because that's just the universe
exactly,
saying, hold my cup.
exactly. No, exactly, exactly. Um, so I think that it's kind of like it sort of keeps me centered that, I always feel like, there's a deeper message in this. Like we're telling the
Mhm.
story, but there is a message within the story. There was another case, the Amy Fitzpatrick case, where she went to a friend's for New Year's. Her family had moved to Spain. They were expats from Ireland. And she just vanished. And that case haunts me because that child was so severely neglected that this case
Mhm.
pissed me the fuck off
Mm.
because when I was hearing her mom in interviews, and yes, I'm going to say it, I was judging her. I was
Right,
judging her because
Yeah,
I'm of the belief nobody is forcing you to have kids. Don't have kids. It's that
right.
simple. If
right,
Yep.
you don't want to parent, because here's the thing, you don't get to go, yeah, you know what? I'm done. You don't get to,
Right.
it doesn't work like that.
right.
Shame on you if it does.
Mm-hmm.
And, she just really had no clue that her kid was missing and was just, you know, was more centered on the boyfriend. And
Mhm.
even though her daughter did not like the boyfriend, had issues with the boyfriend, it was still about the boyfriend.
Right.
And I was just, so the message in that was, you know, I was, center your kids. This kid was 13 years old, 14 years old, maybe, yeah, I think she was actually 15, sorry. But the thing is, it's like, that's the time when you need to really be centering your kids. Like,
Right.
Yep.
like yeah, I get it. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a man or a partner. Good for you. I think that's healthy to do that. But I think that the message is, you have a responsibility.
Yeah,
And
you don't
really,
abandon your kids to be with some
exactly,
dude.
exactly. It's your responsibility to be present. And
Yeah.
and look, I almost didn't have kids because I was like, yeah, I don't know if I can do that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But So I really feel like that's a very important, again, and I always think like this child would not be missing if her
Mom was
mom,
more. Mhm.
right,
Gave a shit.
and
Do
then
you
her
find
mom.
yourself? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. But I was just saying, yeah, like her mom just up and took them to Spain to live with her and her boyfriend, and took her away from her family and her father and it was just like seriously, yeah,
Yeah.
I was pissed.
As
Rightfully
you were
so.
going through that, I was curious because do you find yourself like when you're doing your research and or you're reading or you're seeing those interviews, knowing ahead of time before you even get to the results or get to the next step, you can start to read and get a feel for the bigger picture and not necessarily the who done it, but you can see kind of like I don't want to say right out like, oh, I can see that video, I saw that interview. This is suspect. This is number one for me. This is who I think is responsible. Do you find yourself doing that before you get to the results of the case?
There are, yeah, I mean, there are certainly those times when you come across information that makes it like, oh, that seems to sharpen the lens and the focus on that
Mhm.
person. Um, but I think also the other thing is that I've come to really have this sort of openness, like, don't be surprised. There are many cases where that we have looked at and was like, in a court of law, this would not fly.
Mhm.
But they did that shit.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They did that shit. Like if, following the letter of the law, would we be able to convict? No. But I really feel like he did that shit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and then there are cases where, like we had covered a case, it was the Shenandoah murders of two women, Lolly Winans and Julie Williams, and they were a couple. They were camping and they were murdered. And this had happened in 96. So over the course of the years, they had somebody that they had even arrested for the crime, and they had, they was locked in on this person. And it wasn't like this person, was a good dude, but
Mhm.
there was like, oh, but he may not have, like, maybe we need to. And it was just interesting that as I researched and looked at what was going on, that so many people could have been capable, if not responsible,
Right.
for their murders. Like suspects out of the wazoo. I was like, there's
Yeah.
so many shitty people.
That's what it comes
I
down
was
to.
like,
Yes.
and the common denominator, of course, is they're all men. And I was like, men, it's men. Men are
That's the problem.
Yes. Right?
Well, we have conversations about that on the daily, but that's a different topic for another
Exactly.
Yeah.
day. But going back, so I do believe that you were some kind of a detective or investigator in your past life. So if you could go on to any Slaycation episode and try to solve the mystery or if you had the opportunity, which one would you go to and you feel like you could solve that murder, either whether it was unresolved or whether it was resolved, you were like, I could have done this so much quicker, or I would have been able to solve this because you guys dropped the ball.
That's interesting because there's a few cases, and I guess since we're talking about it, um, I guess the Max McGreevy case, I don't know that I necessarily would have solved it per se, but I would have carried out I would have carried out that investigation a little different.
I have to wonder, was the mom capable of bringing in like a PI to Aruba and be like, I'm unsatisfied with the results. They wouldn't do the DNA. They wouldn't do this. Like, I listened to that one, and Natalie Holloway was the very next year, and voila, she's
Yeah,
missing too.
yeah.
So Aruba has some problem with if somebody goes missing.
Girl,
I
that is
love Aruba. It's very ambient, but maybe don't send your teenager there, especially
yeah, I mean,
unattended.
no, it is
So,
true.
I mean, I feel like maybe if you had more money, or maybe if you had, like, I don't know what it takes to fly in. They did fly in a PI for Natalie's
Yes.
case. For Max's case, I don't think they did. She just kind of conceded and went home. But
She
maybe she
did.
didn't have the means to fly in a
Well,
PI.
that's always something that we have to look at. Like there's, a lot of people don't have the means. She did consult a detective who did look at the case and
And that was when she came back to the States,
yes,
correct? Mhm.
yes. Now, the thing is that he was actually instrumental in helping get the FBI involved. But then the FBI, after 9/11, it all just kind of
Mhm.
fell to the wayside. And I think the important thing is, it's like they always talk about, which I get, it makes sense to me. Investigators always talk about the first 48.
Yeah.
So you need that first 48 is crucial.
Mhm.
And I will always believe that had those men been sequestered and separated and
Because their stories weren't adding up at all.
right, right, right. Because if you separate the two of them and you ask them questions, okay, you could see whether those stories align. And when those stories are not aligning, you could start to chip away at
Right.
those lies and get closer and closer to what the actual story is. I mean, you're never going to know what exactly happened,
Right.
but you'll get sort of, a closer, understanding
Mhm.
to what occurred. And I think that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
Missed
agreed.
opportunity. Um, you know, and with the time that has passed, it was just, and then it got completely swallowed up by the Natalie Holloway case.
Mhm.
Oh, and that didn't help bring like, hey, you would think sometimes that those would be, let's think about
Like,
this.
this is a
and you-
pattern.
Right.
Perhaps, perhaps we
Oh.
should. Because that was pretty obvious that Vandersloot guy did it, but
Yeah,
they didn't charge him
no,
right away at all. It was like a year or two later. It was crazy. Like
it
that,
wasn't until he actually killed someone.
somebody
Right.
else.
So have you found in looking at cases, especially outside the states and stuff, the differences in the way they handle law and the way that they handle crimes, the way they handle suspects, victims, like is there a frustration there? Is there similarities between the way they do it outside of the states and or how do you navigate that part of like, well, balancing what how we handle things in the states versus how they're handling it?
Well, it's interesting because I think at the end of the day, a lot of it really just comes down to what is good, solid investigative skills and what
Mhm.
is not. And I think like you can have, two different systems, but the execution, if you have a good execution, it could be, it could yield results. Like in Aruba or in like a lot of these countries, they do what is called like a reconstruction, like they reconstruct the crime scene. They have the person sort of act out or play out, you know, the crime. I mean, and I don't know how useful that is, but I would
Mhm.
imagine that there is a psychology behind that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know. Um, but I do, think that if certain things are done, especially right out the gate, could
Right.
really help with getting these kinds, with getting answers.
Yeah.
Do you find consistency in, like, as we can say, just bringing up the Aruba case, for instance, that's how they consistently handle? One of the things I liked that you guys talk about and have mentioned, and especially in like your show notes and stuff, is you don't, when you're doing a location, you don't generalize locations. This is a bad area. You give information about this is what to expect of in
Right.
that area, because unfortunately there's crime everywhere. There's
It can
negative
happen
activity,
to
there's
anybody at
bad.
any time.
And I think you do a really good job of not making it sound like don't go here.
Right.
But are you finding consistency in the repeat locations that you've seen, not necessarily just in your
Right.
podcast, but in your true crime journey all over,
Right. Yeah. Well, I will say that, there's consistency in that there's always going to, no matter what, no matter where, there's always going to be some brand of crazy. Like there's not, there's no getting around that, there, there's always going to be some danger that lurks just because of the nature of human beings. And where there's human beings, there's going to be some freaky shit going on.
Yes.
We're not getting around that. We're just not. So a lot of it really isn't the place in as much as the people in that place.
Right.
And you have to look at the people that you're around.
Right.
It's like you would think that, the McGreevy family would be safe in a nice resort, and that why should they be alarmed? Why should they have their guard up when they're just making friendly chit chat with a fellow guest?
Right.
Like, you wouldn't think like, this person could have a deep-seated history of some major shady shit. Like, you're not thinking like that,
Right.
So it's almost like it almost doesn't really matter where you are,
Yeah.
It just sort of drives home the point that no matter where you are, no matter how you perceive the safety of that particular place, you still have to have your guard up.
Yeah.
Right.
And trust your gut. Like for that poor mama that was worn down, like if she had, it's doubtful that anybody at that point, what they've been through, and she was just trying to throw the kid a bone, and let him have a good time. But also she did have that gut instinct, like,
Yes.
I don't think I should let him go. I really don't think I should let him go. Like for me, my takeaway from that is trust your gut. Be the fucking bitchy mom, Denise. And
Exactly.
you feel like if you feel like something is wrong, then you should trust that instinct. Absolutely.
Exactly.
But we do get there as moms and like, okay, we've been here for a few days. I felt
That's
comfortable.
what's so sad about that one. That, for me, that's that one.
Yes,
I haven't
agree.
listened to all of them, but for me, that was the hardest one to take away because she didn't do anything wrong. She was just trying to have a good time on vacation, and they were totally poached. They found them, and they knew they had a plan of action, and they had a history that showed that they were capable of this, and that's just so unfortunate for that family. But
exactly.
So just taking a little bit of a different spin. So you work with your husband Adam, and you work with Jerry. Do you guys ever have any challenges of like, working with your husband or with your bestie? Like, is there any episodes that have come up where you're really not on the same page, or one thinks he could have done it, or you think he couldn't have, or how does that work with spending so much time with your significant other and working on the podcast?
That's a lot of time. Denise and I've learned that it's a lot of time that goes into recording a podcast. So we
feel like we're a married couple. We call each other.
That's what it does. That's what it does. I think, I feel very fortunate in that we are very much in sync. And just by being in sync, we're sensitive to each other. And I think that is instrumental because you're not going to agree on everything. You're going to have different ideas. You're going to have different thoughts. You're going to have, Adam is sort of the audience proxy. So he's listening to me tell the story. So yeah, there have been times when he's like, "Oh, I'm not getting it," or and I'm like, oh, "Fuck you, you're not listening."
Yes.
But as somebody that I recognize, like as the audience proxy, I always, and I think we both kind of take the attitude of, okay, let's take a step back and let me just try to understand where you're coming from. And I think that has been helpful for us because at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to make a great show. We want our show to resonate with our audience. We
Yep.
want our takeaways to be, helpful. And given that that's all of our primary goal, we center that and try not to let our own little bitchiness take
Yeah.
over. Because that can happen.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to kind of like, all right, let me just take a step back. All right, where, and so I think that we've kind of done really well with that. I think Adam too, you know, us being in a relationship, having, raised a kid, which, I always joke, like he and I have completely different parenting styles. And, given that it was like never, like we was not that couple. It was like, oh my God, we're going to have babies and we never really discussed like, well, what are we going to do? And come to find out, completely different.
Yes.
Completely different. That was like on the job training. Like,
Yeah.
So I think like having been able to navigate those challenges has really helped us in sort of looking at the big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of, recognizing that whatever is going on within us personally and, like, yes, maybe that needs to be dealt with. But right now, what is the big picture? How do we address that? And, and if I didn't like his attitude, we'll have a conversation about that later.
Yeah.
Because we know who wears the pants in this relationship.
Exactly.
Did you guys have the same vision for the podcast when you sat down to start recording, or did it grow? Denise and I had one vision where we were sort of professional, and then it slowly turned into, this is not us. We're more chill. We're more laid back. Let's break out the mimosa. And we love your vibe. We love you guys.
Thank
shooting
you.
Shit back
And we
and
like
forth.
that you're a little bit sweary like me.
Yes. We really tried not to swear in the beginning and bleep it out or cut it out. And we're like, this is so not us.
That's not us. So we're just decided to embrace us. And if people don't like swearing, then don't fucking listen to us.
No, but I think that that's the best advice, really. Be who you are.
Yeah.
And it's actually funny. My daughter went to Catholic school, and the patron saint of the school was Francis de Sales, and there was this saying that was all over the school. It was be yourself. It sort of is be yourself and be it well, which I think is a good
thing to live by. Yeah.
I mean, unless you're a shitty person, and then we'll have but
well, then they get to be an episode.
Right, exactly. But I think that like I take it as a call to really work to being our best selves. And I think like doing the podcast is a journey, and it's a personal journey because you're each having the journey together but separately, and you're kind of coming together to go, yeah, this isn't working. This works better for us. We enjoy being authentically ourselves. And this is a place where I believe we can do that. And I agree, because I feel like we came to that as well. Like, we're not journalists. And there are plenty of true crime podcasts that will give you that journal deep dive researched from that investigative, forensic, dry, and just recognizing like we're not for everybody, but we don't have to be, just like you guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's okay. There's something out there for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it takes all kinds to make the world go round.
Yes.
Exactly.
So do you have any upcoming projects or exciting things that we should tell our listeners to be on the lookout for?
Well, I think I would just say, just give our podcast a listen, I do some bonus content where I talk about, different things. A lot of it is, maybe information that didn't make it into the original episode or updates. Sometimes, like I have a case of a Valentine's Day case that I'm going to talk about. So I would just, if you feel like you want to laugh, if you feel like you want to learn, if you feel like you want to just, journey through the dark psyches of our crazy fellow human beings, come one and all.
Yes.
Yeah, we it's hard topics, but we have a good time. And I think that we put out something that is useful and important, because I feel, in a sense, there's something special about the people in the story not being forgotten.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. So where can our listeners find Slaycation on your and go ahead and follow you? Like, what formats? What are you on?
Well, we are on Facebook, which is kind of where most of our Slaycators go. So it's Slaycators only. We have that page, and please come. And we have Slaycation, which is also another Facebook. It's more broad. We have Slaycation WTF on Instagram.
Yeah,
right, on Instagram. And I actually have because I'm a rabid knitter, crocheter, crafter. Like, I have to have my hands be busy at all time. It's like the perfect way to channel my ADHD and OCD.
Yeah.
And that is That Girl Knits. So if you want some ideas for what to make or what new hobby to start up, you can find me on Instagram at That Girl Knits.
Nice.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have had a blast chatting with you and getting to know a little bit more deep dive into Slaycations.
Yes, thank you guys. It's been a blast. I had such a great time just hearing your story and talking a little bit about what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey guys, so we covered everything from chilling true crime stories and the emotional toll of storytelling for this particular type of content. And Kim gave us an amazing, fascinating behind the scenes look at the Slaycation podcast. In this particular episode, we did talk about a few different Slaycation episodes. So number 47, Welcome to the Coast of Crime, as well as episode 57 on the Trail of Murder at Shenandoah, part 1, and then 58 was part 2. So if you're interested in listening to any of those episodes in detail, you can go for the full episodes on Slaycation podcast.
Yes. And if you love a mix of travel and true crime, make sure you subscribe to Slaycation wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
Big thanks to Kim for joining us. We absolutely loved having her. Had a great time chatting with her. She was so much fun.
Indeed.
And as always, don't forget to follow Suitcase Divas so you never miss an episode. So thanks for joining us this week, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye.